Howdy. One more time, I flew from Texas to do this with y'all, so howdy. Every one of you smiled as soon as you said howdy. It's like the beauty of being Texan. We're just friendly. We're good people. For the record, I'm not a Cowboys fan. I just want everybody to know that. I was born in D.C., so originally I was a Redskins fan. Now I just like college football. Today, I'm going to challenge you to answer this call to live an undivided life. And the conversation that we're going to have is going to be one that I believe is mostly countercultural. In many places, we're going to be having to go against the grain or against what the culture and our businesses and our society has told us about how we're called to live. And in that, we're going to find the freedom where we can love and serve Christ and live by our priorities in everything we do. I'm going to start off, though, by telling you a little bit about me, because I think you're going to hear this theme that I've been challenging the conventional norms for a very long time. So I graduated from Texas A&M University as the youngest of 4 kids to go through that school where we all overlapped with one another. And if you know anything about being the youngest, I'm sure some of you are, you're like the worst kid in the family. I started school with more college credits than any of my siblings, but it still took longer to get out than any of them, so my parents were really proud of that. When I did finally graduate, I went and I got a bad job at a good company. You see, I went to work for Frito-Lay. I was put in charge of 3 lines of corn product from receipt all the way through to packaging, and it really didn't even fit who I was, but of course, Frito-Lay is a good company. But it really hit me that I was in the wrong role when I got to the end of my first week and they handed me my business card, and that's when I found out that officially I was going to be a corn resource. I've spent 20-something years trying to figure out what this means. I don't know to this day, but I do know that a corn resource gets 5 days of paid time off. And so I used my vacation, I took off and went to New York City, and all my friends were saying, okay, check out these parts of town, go eat here, do these different activities. And then I was told that I had to go see this one off-Broadway show. And if you've ever seen off-Broadway shows, they typically interact with the crowd a little bit more. It's not so much just sitting back and watching, you become part of the show. This one was the story of Midsummer Night's Dream, told entirely through disco music. And it was inside of a discotheque instead of being in the forest of Midsummer Night's Dream. And they said, when the show is done, it's an all-night disco party, so come ready to dance and have fun. I was born in 78, and I was getting the chance to live in 78. So I go to the show, and I'm having a blast. And if you look in this picture, in the bottom part of the picture, you see these 2 disco kind of cubes. It looks like a mirrored top. I got pulled up on there by one of the cast members. I danced around. I had a good time. High-fived this guy, jumped down. The show went on, and then the party starts afterwards. And it is a blast. That show blew me away. All these people play multiple roles. You don't even know it. This woman walks up, and she said, "Excuse me, sir, I'm the general manager of this show. We've been watching you dance tonight. Would you ever come back to audition for this show?" I said, "Ma'am, I'm a corn resource." So I flew back up there a few months later, called in sick to work, didn't tell anybody but a few friends I was doing this. They auditioned 300 men that day, and I didn't have to see a single one of them because they gave me a private audition that evening, and they suited me up in the show, and they told me during the pre-show which song to sneak out and go upstairs and put my street clothes back on. When I did it, I walked out, and this woman said, "You're in. When can you start?" That is not what I expected. I thought the adventure was going to end there. So I said, "Okay, great. I need to quit my job and sell my car and put my stuff in storage. I should probably tell my parents that I'm in New York. How about 2 weeks?" So I fly back to Texas. You guys are old enough, you know what this thing is. So I call my mom on the phone, and again, youngest of 4, she answers, and I said, "Hey, I have something to tell you, but you should probably get Dad on the phone so I can just say this once." And she has that breath like, "What did you do now?" I said, "Hey guys, I've been in New York City for the past 2 days. I just quit my job at Frito-Lay because I'm going to move back to New York and I'm going to become a disco fairy." I did it. I moved to New York. I danced off Broadway for almost a year in a show that ran for 8 years. I was treated like a celebrity. I hung out with celebrities. Some people go into debt backpacking Europe. I went into debt dancing in an off-Broadway production in New York City. I do, though, want everybody in here to take a moment to feel sorry for my parents, because I wish that was the only time I ever called them. But I've made calls like that before, and the punchline was never quite as funny. You see, when I was starting my sophomore year at Texas A&M, I called them, and when my dad got on the phone, I said, "Hey, guys, I actually was driving last night while intoxicated. I was pulled over and arrested. I spent last night in jail, and by the grace of God, I was pulled over for speeding, not for being in an accident. I'm so grateful that I didn't hurt or kill somebody else." But I also told my parents in that moment, this is not the first time that I've ever committed this crime, and that I'm guilty. And my parents were extremely disappointed. Of course, here I was, the only kid they've ever had spend the night in jail. And so what I ended up doing was telling my parents, they took my license immediately, the state of Texas did. I said, as soon as we can, I would like to get a lawyer so that I can just plead guilty. And I went into this very practical mindset for a second. The practical mindset was simply, if I can start the punishment phase of my life soon, then that phase will end at some point, and then I can get on with the post-punishment phase of my life. But I also had this moment of, my parents raised me right. And so here I am committing a crime. I wanted to own the consequences of my actions. And it was a death-to-self moment that transformed the rest of my life. So I did plead guilty. I lost my license for over a year. My parents had to pony up the money for thousands of dollars of fines and fees. Of course, there's community service and probation folks that will stop by my house to check on what's going on, what's my life like. And then along the way, I went to a Mothers Against Drunk Driving Victim Impact Panel. This was on November 11th of 1998, and I share that with you because it is the most profound moment of my life. As I went in there, not reluctant, but having not been in an accident, I sat down to listen to what these people had to say, and this woman started speaking about the death of her daughter, who, as a high school student, had a flat tire, and when she pulled over on the side of the road, got out, she was hit and killed instantly by a drunk driver. The picture made its way around to me. It looked like a friend of mine. And I stopped and looked at this picture, and I asked myself, what's the difference between the guy who killed her and me? And I couldn't come up with any difference other than God put me in this moment for some reason. And then, like a lightning bolt that I can never explain other than tell you, the divine providence or divine revelation hit me with a 20-year vision of what I was supposed to do and what was going to be the impact. God put something on my heart that was so clear that it wasn't a vision, it wasn't a prophecy, it just was. It just is. And I saw that I was supposed to do something so that other people in my town in Texas A&M didn't make the same mistake, so that less people would be impacted by this unbiased killer. When I went out to my car, my friend was driving. I didn't have a license, and I got in. She said, "How was it?" Thinking I was going to be miserable. I said, "We're going to start the best designated driver program in the country, and we are going to need a ton of help." From that moment on, I transformed the way I looked at college. I was reading ahead in all my business books, and my grades were not showing that. I was reading ahead because I was trying to learn this stuff. I was devouring every aspect of how to run a business, how to start a student organization, what can I do to set up a 501c3? And I started building a business plan that ended up being about 200 pages long as I studied every program in the nation. Everything I studied was a failure. Schools with 30,000 students were giving 20 to 30 rides a year. I could only find programs that worked within a fraternity or within a sorority where they took care of their own, and not any that took care of an enterprise or a campus-wide need. And so I set out and said, what would it be for me, the punk kid who thought he was invincible, to use a program home? My wife, Amanda, she's much younger than me, but she's also much smaller than me. She's a 5'4", weighs next to nothing little girl. Woman. She's a woman. I tried to ask, what would a woman like that use to get home? You know, is she going to feel safe? And so I saw these programs, a bus program where a bunch of people would get on, most of them probably inebriated. That tiny freshman girl is not going to get on feeling safe with a whole bunch of drunk men. She's not going to want to be labeled. What about the part where some of these had routes? They would drop somebody off. They had to walk for blocks to get to their home for the night. That wasn't safe either. What about the part where it felt punitive to work for these organizations? So I just unraveled everything. And I said, here's what we're going to build. And I was told by almost everyone in my life that what I wanted to do was impossible. I would talk about how we were going to have a student organization that was also a separate 501c3 within the Texas A&M system. I was told that was impossible. Then I said that we're going to go and instead of driving our own cars, we're actually going to rent cars. Well, you can't rent cars when you're 20 years old. But I went and put on a sales pitch that took me about 3 months to pull off. And then Enterprise Rent-A-Car rented every one of the cars that we were going to use in my name for the first 2 years of this organization. Then I was told you can't get enough money to pay the 250 people that it's going to take to run the operations when you have 16 cars every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night. How are you going to find the money to motivate those people? And I said, we don't need money to motivate people. We need to create a place where people are serving the common good. We need to create a place where people get to go work because they get to be a part of something bigger than themselves, where there's a camaraderie, that the service that we're providing and the way that we're attacking this is a team sport, where our relationships are being formed because we're serving in a way that is having a lifelong impact on the people that are using this. We're going to actually create an organization that's so good that people are going to be lining up for competitive interview applications, and then they're going to pay student fees to us to give up their nights and weekends. I was told that was impossible. Well, we kept conquering each one of these things over and over, and we came up with a program that was free, non-judgmental, student-run, convenient, picks you up where you are, takes you home, comfortable, a guy and a girl in every car. The cars are rented from Enterprise. There's a driver, and then there's somebody who's navigating. And then the last part of all of this was that it had to be rewarding to everybody involved. So rewarding for the students getting a ride home and their families who don't even know they got a ride last night. Rewarding for the university as a whole and the community because we have less drunk drivers on the road. We're making responsible decision-making a cool thing to do. But also rewarding for the people that were working for us. Making it where that was something that was building these incredible bonds and moments of giving them the mission, vision, and value of what we were going to do, and then giving them the keys, both literally and figuratively, so that they had tremendous responsibility. Treating a 20-year-old kid like a fully formed adult and saying, I trust you, let's go get it done together. Well, what we ended up putting together was, I got a great story for you. There was a lot of people who wanted to stop this. There was people that told me I couldn't do it, and there was people who said, I'm going to stop you. So there was a man who was in charge of the university police department. He had just retired from the FBI. His name was Bob Wyatt, and he had an eye patch. So imagine the scariest human for 20-year-old Jeff. Sends an email to 2,000 people and says, if you help this guy, it's a mistake. This is going to blow up in our face. Whatever you do, don't help Jeff. So I go meet with him. He says, son, this is a disaster. I'm not going to read your business plan. When you fail, I'm going to say it to your face. I said, great. When that day comes, I'll come back and meet with you first. And he said, deal. I look forward to seeing you. Fast forward 2 more weeks, and the Texas A&M University system has a risk management department, 9 lawyers who had a meeting with me and the president and vice president of the university. And the meeting was basically called 90 minutes to shut down Jeff's project. And everything they threw at me during this meeting, we beat them in a game of almost business chess. They would say, you haven't thought about car wrecks. And I said, it's on the agenda. We're literally going to talk about it, and I'm going to show you the research. You haven't thought about what happens with violence, with date rape drugs, with PR. They went through everything, and we had already put everything into motion. And at the very end, the head of the risk management department looks over at the president of the university and says, we don't like it, but we can't stop him. He's thought of everything with his team. So the president says, I got a question for you, Jeff. What are you going to do when Bob Wyatt with the eye patch, when he's drunk and he needs a ride home? I said, well, I have your phone number. You go pick him up. And then I held my breath. And I saw my agenda get crumpled up, thrown across the table. It hits me. And I don't know if this is like the worst moment of my life. And I turned to my advisor and he goes, you did it, baby. Get up. Let's go. And from that moment on, the university started to clear a path so that we could launch this program. What ended up launching 11 months after God put it on my heart and made it so clear is a program called Caring Aggies Are Protecting Over Our Lives. The short form of that is carpool. We put carpool in the back of 50,000 student IDs before we gave our first ride. We were known throughout the entire city and all the student body because we hustled to get this going. And within a few months, we were known nationally as the most successful program of our kind to reduce drunk driving in any college town. By the time we finished that first semester, I was working with the students at the University of Georgia to launch Watchdogs. Then I started working with the students at Colorado State for ram rides. This continued until we ended up building a second company to take this completely unique and very practical model to college campuses everywhere. And I'm happy to report that here, 26 years later, Carpool is still running at Texas A&M and has given over 300,000 rides to people in need to go home and not to other bars, clubs, or parties. Yes, absolutely. And wouldn't you know that it's saved people's lives? It's caused moments to be somebody waking up the next morning and continue to live their dreams. And if you could only name one person out of 300,000, everybody in here would do it all over again. But I can promise you it's more than that. It continues to be more across this entire network. But it's wild because you got to understand how many times I was told, you can't, that'll never work, this is a dumb idea. My mom, who I love dearly, said, great idea, honey, can you stop doing this and get back to your classwork? It was just a couple of years later that my mom and I were standing there with my dad because I was winning an award from the Texas governor, and she's like, well, this is pretty cool. I actually worked so hard on this that I worked myself into the hospital. The fourth day after the program started, I got hospitalized for a week. And when I was in the hospital, I learned a lot of life lessons that I also have put into every other company I've worked on. But it's really neat because while I was there, I looked over and saw a bouquet of flowers from the police department that had arrested me 2 years earlier. So having this undying belief that there's a better way has opened up amazing things in my life. So I did Carpool. I ended up going to New York. And then I came back to Texas and I needed a job. So I found my way into deregulated electricity. You know a lot of that here in Pennsylvania. It was brand new in Texas, which was great. I just needed a job. And so I decided I was going to apply myself just like I did when I was starting and running Carpool. But what did that mean? Because I don't know anything about electricity on day one, and I wasn't really that excited about it. But I loved finding a way to create human, flourishing, and innovative processes for people. And so I said, you know what worked at Carpool is probably what's going to work here at this First Choice Power electricity company. So I said, why don't we create a place where this isn't a world of protectionists where I'm so smart and you're not, or that knowledge is power, when in fact sharing knowledge is powerful. As I started to build up the team around me, we started to have these formative conversations about trying to understand what does it really mean to live by a set of core values, to have a shared mission, to be all driving towards the same vision so that we can sprint in a highly aligned and loosely controlled culture. We also believed in justice and just wages. We were doing as much as we could to be part of our community. And then we were giving incredible agency and responsible decision-making to the people around us. I didn't know this word at the time, but the Catholic Church taught me subsidiarity. This whole concept that I should be taking decision-making away from the centralized power and giving it to the people that are the closest to the actual action that are still capable of making those decisions. So we ended up creating this culture where a bunch of Dougs, do you know what a Doug is? A dumb old utility guy? A bunch of Dougs transformed into a thriving electricity company where people were showing up to the sales meeting just so they could be part of the book club and the debates. People were finding ways to collaborate across different parts of the company. In fact, we'd have somebody quit, and one of my salespeople would say, I'll go fill in that department for a couple months and come back whenever we have it backfilled. It was this beautiful experience. It ended up launching the best technology in the electricity industry because people were no longer afraid of their job being automated. They just wanted to celebrate and share. It ended up being a culture where people were growing because they were taking care of each other. And when our parent company tried to sell us in 2011, they said, if we get anywhere near $200 million, we'll sell this deal on the spot. And the very first bidder came in and said, $300 million will pay for this because of the growth of your commercial sales division, because of your technology, and because of your culture. And so all these things that I was doing there, I was told you shouldn't do. Don't ever be friends with your subordinates, because if you're friends with them, how are you ever going to have a tough conversation or reprimand or terminate? Well, you're probably not going to have friends if you call them subordinates. That's the first place. I was told that if you're going to bring faith in the workplace at all, it's okay to be somewhat Christian, but easy on the Catholicism. I can remember even telling people very early on in my energy career that I had to go to something tonight. It was just this little thing, and I forgot to tell people what I was going to was the parish mission night, or that I was going to confession. And I started to become more bold in that. And I realized that the more I just shared, not told people what they should do, but just shared who I was actually having stronger and better relationships because people got to know me, not the postured version of me. The sale of that company was so great that we did decide to take a day off afterwards. And the next day we launched a company called Five. Five the digit. We actually trademarked the digit 5. And this is an energy advisory and brokerage firm starting with 0 clients. And we said, if we build this on the principles that we had started in the old energy company, and we have all of these in place, this playbook ready to go, that we will have tremendous growth and incredible recruiting. The first 10 people all said yes, and then we were off to the races. We won back-to-back awards every year for growth, culture, innovation, and leadership. In fact, I can remember even having a debate with myself. I said, don't call the Empire State Building. Don't call Southwest Airlines. They don't need our help. They have big teams. In 2019, we took over both of those accounts. And then I ended up leaving this company 3 years ago as the co-founder and chief culture officer. But I got to tell you what happened in this company, that my business partners, and I got to share this with you, I was surrounded by some great men, people I respect a lot. They were older than me. They were smarter than me. They were richer than me, but none of them were as cool as me. So they asked me to build out this culture. And what they didn't do is say, and leave out all your Catholic stuff. They said, whatever you're going to do, just do it. And so I started running a playbook that's actually based on the Catholic social teachings of the church. And that's why this happened. I left there 3 years ago, and just 3 weeks ago, the company 5 was named the best place to work in America in Fortune magazine for small and medium businesses. Not one of the best, the number one place. And isn't that cool that that happened? But do I feel like I missed out because I was the guy who architected this thing? Not at all. Because it proves that this playbook works. Because I don't have to be there. It's not the cult of personality. This thing continues to exist and thrive without me there. So I end up leaving 5, and I start a company called Undivided Life. I, at one point, felt like I was maybe going to be just walking away from something. And the more I prayed, and the more I discerned, and I asked God, where do I feel that peace in my life? It was to completely drop the barrier between all of my priorities and how I spent my time. I knew that if I could build up a lifestyle and a work life that recognized that my relationship with Jesus Christ was paramount. And that came before that with my wife, and that my wife was second only to Jesus Christ. And then after that, it's my kids. But my kids are not on the same level as my wife. And then after that was everything else. And I said, what would I do with that? Well, I know what I would do. I would start working on growth and culture consulting for other organizations, because it turns out I've seen this work everywhere I've ever been. It's not my playbook. We ended up, well, my friend was in an incredible job at a private equity firm. He loved it. But God struck him too, because when I could see that we could start to have a for-profit company where we were doing work that would have a profound impact on our clients that are believers, our clients that are, fully living a Catholic faith, and our clients who've never been in a church, that we could evangelize to them and help them to know and see God just by the way we did work and the way we helped to advise their companies. Guess what happened? A whole bunch of people started lining up to come work for us, because it's what people want. People are really seeking this type of a conversation or this type of a purpose. In addition to being an advisor, we actually have a holding company, and I'm just going to share this with you because I think it's really phenomenal what happened. We ended up buying or starting a couple different organizations. One you heard mentioned earlier, the Beatted Dudes, a religiously funny podcast. I'm the guy in the middle. The Beatted Dudes has been a cool enterprise for 2.5 years, but you know what it proves? We use humor as the entry point. We have family-friendly, clean humor, guys messing with each other, some self-deprecating humor. And it makes it where people that are completely on the outside of church feel comfortable jumping into the conversation. And the extremely well-catechized, extremely orthodox also want to jump in the conversation. And it brings joy and laughter and fraternity and camaraderie. And then we talk about everything. We talk about loss. We talk about regret. We talk about spiritual healing. We talk about our businesses. And it ends up being this very formative place for people to have real conversations. So we own the Beatitudes. We also just became the minority owners, and I'm the CEO of Howdy Homemade Ice Cream. This is, Howdy. I didn't name this company. How funny is that? Howdy is an ice cream shop that employs almost strictly special needs adults, those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Howdy, before we became a part of it earlier this year, was named the Employer of the Year by the National Down Syndrome Congress. And they were struggling to grow past a few franchises and one corporate store, and now we're off to the races. We're going to open 50 Howdy stores in the next 4 years and then keep that growth, because it turns out that work is good, and dignified work is a place where we all get formed. It's a place where we get to be grown into who God's calling us to be, the fullness of ourselves, so long as we're given real work. That applies to all of you. It applies to the formerly incarcerated. It applies to folks with special needs. Work is good when it's done to the best of our ability, and especially for God's glory. We also are the executive producers of a film, and I'm just sharing this because I want you to see it. It's called Triumph of the Heart. It's about Maximilian Kolbe's last 14 days on earth and the 9 men he suffered with in a starvation chamber. This is getting rave reviews, and you can bring it to any one of your parishes. Just go to triumphoftheheart.com. That movie has been phenomenal, and if you don't think the devil is real, we had 450 theaters booked, and 200 of them got canceled by a major theater company for no reason whatsoever, and we had to get U.S. senators involved in trying to open them back up, and it thwarted all of our momentum. So now we're in parish life before we go into streaming, so look it up. And then last, if you've heard of this one, we also own the Catholic Gentleman podcast. The gentleman who runs that is actually our CMO, and at the end I'll give you some cool offers related to the Catholic Gentleman. So why do I share these things? Well, first of all, it's just neat. I want you to see like the fruition of 3 years of living an undivided life. But I also want you to hear, I get thanked on a daily or weekly basis for my ministry. For my ministry. It's not a nonprofit. I don't work for a church. I'm not a deacon. I don't have any right to be giving spiritual direction to anybody. I'm just working. I write on LinkedIn every day. And I do good business, and I honor and love Jesus Christ, my wife, my kids, and then everybody else. And people will thank me for my ministry. And how many times do we say that the ministry is this thing we'll do later? Or when we get later on in our life, we'll get more serious about it. So why do I share all this crazy stuff with you? The first is I'm about to share a couple of very practical ways in which you can both live an undivided life, but also be the man that God's calling you to be, the Catholic leader of your home and your community. And when you find that one thing that you're going to share with somebody else, I want you to tell them that you were spoken to at this conference. The Holy Spirit came to you through the words of a disco fairy. The second is, some of you have already gone through in your head, like, this doesn't apply to me. I'm retired. I'm in the church. I'm in higher ed. I'm in a publicly traded company. I don't have a wife and kids, whatever. It's not true. Everything I'm sharing with you is universal. It's universal, and I've seen it in every one of those pockets and places because, again, this wasn't written by a bunch of businessmen. This is truly the teachings of Jesus Christ as expressed through the encyclicals and the Catholic social teaching of the Catholic Church. And the last thing I want to tell you is if you listen to this, I'm always talking about trying to find a unique or creative or countercultural way to tackle opportunities and obstacles. And what I get is unconventional results. Atypical approach, atypical results. So if you listen to this story, I started reading all the business books that everybody knows about. I was launching companies, reading tribal leadership and conscious capitalism. I was being formed in these books, and I thought something was missing. Meanwhile, I'm Gen X. My parents sent me off to pretty terrible CCD classes where some volunteer did their best. I was poorly catechized, but I loved my faith so much that I knew when I was 65 years old, as a 15-year-old, when I was 65, I was going to be an usher in the church. That was my trajectory. It's not very hard. But while I was going through all this business growth and I was having kind of these breakthroughs that I would just call very practical, I started also reading more. I was reading the catechism. I started praying the rosary. I started doing daily mass. I would join all my 80-year-old peers as we went to the men's group on Thursday morning to study the readings for Sunday. I went to the Holy Land. I went on Christ Renews His Parish. All these things were coming together for me. And then that document that's at the top of that little pyramid there, it's called The Vocation of the Business Leader. I read it 10 years ago. And it's a 30-page document. You can get it for free online. And it put to words what I felt in my heart. That all the worldly things I had ever felt were just worldly. They were just kind of the banners, the awards that would open a door for me. All of the things that I ever did that were of God and for God was the love that satisfies. The stuff that would never leave me, the stuff that filled me up. And then when I think about my role, where God placed me as a business person, the vocation of the business leader showed me that I had been learning about and seeing the practical wins that come from serving the common good, acting in solidarity with the disadvantaged, giving true subsidiarity to those around you, having a complete focus on the dignity of the human person, also operating in justice with just wages. Think about dignity of the human person. I just told you about Howdy Homemade Ice Cream. I've worked with 1 million nonprofits that do pro-life work. I love it. I hope all of you do too. And then I go and become the CEO of Howdy Homemade. And a week ago, I was on EWTN's Pro-Life Weekly because we're doing it at all stages. We're living it at all stages. We're showing it at all stages. But you know what? That's not it. If I stopped right there, that's not it. It's once you realize that Christ has to be the center of your entire life. And that once I put Christ at the center of my entire life, that I understood that every part of my worship in daily Mass was about the holy sacrifice of the Eucharist, and that I got to spend time with Jesus, and that I got to have Jesus come into my being every day. My wife said something so beautiful. We were getting ready to have one of our children, and we did C-sections. And she was at Sunday Mass, and she goes, "Oh, I'm so excited right now and nervous," because it wasn't about the coming birth. It was because she knew that was the last time the baby in her womb was going to receive the body of Christ until his or her first communion. And I thought that was such a beautiful witness of the fact that being a Christian is not about being a good person. It's about putting Christ first in our lives. And when I did that, everything has changed and led to this freedom that I talk about. So when we're going to talk about living an undivided life, we're going to cover it in thoughts, words, and actions. And we're going to do a couple exercises. I'm going to tell a few stories as well. Sound good? All righty. So we're going to start off by talking about family. I know it's early. You had coffee, so bear with me on this one. I do want you to join me in an exercise that we're going to ask the Holy Spirit to just calm our bodies and our minds for a second. And I'm actually going to shut my eyes as I ask you to do the same thing. So please shut your eyes. If you don't, you're not playing along. Come on, let's do this. All right, a couple of deep breaths. Each one inside your brain, just ask for the Holy Spirit to enter into your thoughts. Come, Holy Spirit. All right, the picture I want you to put in your mind's eye right now, and in the image of what you're seeing, I want you to imagine your family, whatever that means to you right now. All of them, some of them. Imagine your family in the happiest freeze frame. Like imagine kids, grandkids, parents, cousins, like whoever it is in your life, your spouse, your beautiful, wonderful spouse, the happy moment, the joy moment. Stay in that moment. I want you in the deep recesses of your heart to just repeat the phrase, "I love my family. I love my family." I love my family so much. I love my family, and I would blank for them. I love my family, and I would blank for them. All right, open up your eyes. You got to see your family in these pictures. What did you say to yourself when you said, "I love my family and I would blank"? What did you say? You'd live for them. What else? Die. What else? I would do anything, right? All of us probably said all three of these things, right? And it's true. You actually know that you would run into a burning building. You would try to stop a car crash with your own body for your family. Like, that's not a surprise in these acute moments. In fact, I'd be willing to bet most of you would do it for each other's kids or for my family, right? We would die for our family. We would do anything for our family. It's actually how most of us got our wife to say yes. We'd say, "I would do anything for you." But then the question is, would we really? You said live. I love it, right? Would we live? Like, let's go further. Would you live healthy? Would you be healthy for your family? Like, would you make the decisions in the most mundane, boring parts of every day of your life around hydration and nutrition and exercise and rest and respite? Would you make those decisions on a regular basis because your family deserves to have the best version of you, whatever that is? And some of us have chronic things, some of us have genetic things. I'm just saying, would you be healthy for them? How about this? Would you be virtuous for them? Would you constantly chase an intentionality around virtuous living, virtuous habits, and people who build up the virtue life around you, rather than putting yourself into moments of sinful thoughts or actions or even the near occasion of sin? Would you be virtuous? And then what about this one? Would you pray for your family? I know if I asked a poll, every one of you would say yes. Do you pray for your family? Would you? Everybody says yes. And then if I say, do you pray with your family? Everybody mostly still says yes. It's like, oh yeah, we do grace and I've done some Hail Marys. But do we actually pray with our family? Because it turns out praying with kids is really easy. I know how easy it is to pray with kids. We can bless them, we can pray with them, we can say little cute prayers. And with our family, we can keep going through Our Fathers and Hail Marys, which I never want you to stop. I want you to do that every day. But what about with our spouse? Do we stop? Do we call time out and say, hey, we're facing a decision here. Let's pray over this before we go any further. And pray out loud with your wife. What about when you're driving to go see the in-laws? Do you pray for the peace and the presence to get through? What about when something happens, instead of saying, we did it? What about saying, time out, let's give thanks to God for this moment, for this good news, for this joyful day? When I challenge men about this, you know what the number one thing is that we struggle with? That it's awkward. Like, you hadn't prayed out loud with your wife other than the normal stuff, and now you're going to go home tonight and be like, hey, before we go to bed, let's just pray together. And it's going to feel awkward. Like, I promise it will if you haven't done it regularly for a while. But if you do it the next time and the next time, awkward goes to awesome. And what happens is you realize, whether your wife will verbalize this or not, whether she's in the same path you're on right now in faith or not, your wife and your kids and your family want this. People want this. They might not have the right words, but you are called to be a spiritual leader in your home and for the people that you impact. You are called to make these prayers. So do it. And this conference, this summit is a perfect reason, a perfect excuse to turn around and tell your family, tell your wife, hey, this crazy guy got up there earlier today and he challenged me and I want to take the challenge on. Will you help me to get through this awkward stuff? And let's pray together every night this week. Let's just start there and see how it goes. It can be the shortest prayer. Just name 2 things you're grateful for. You don't even have to get into the hard stuff. And then when Sunday comes around, Sabbath. We were given the Sabbath. We should do the action of Sabbathing. We should have that verb in our life. There's an incredible book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry that helps to contextualize this. But we should truly honor the Sabbath. It is not just a place of rest and a place of worship, but it does something incredibly deep about us being the spiritual leader of our home when Sabbaths are used for those specific reasons, and not to be busy, not to book everything, not to catch up on everything at work. Sabbath like you mean it. All right, so we talk about family. Let's talk about kiddos, especially the ones in the womb. As men, I'm going very practical here, you have an awesome opportunity to challenge the way people speak, to challenge the way you speak about children, especially preborn. I have a lot of kids. After the first one, we never found out gender again. So my first was a daughter. And when I was getting ready to have number 2, people would say, all right, man, you hoping for that boy? And I'd say, whatever God has in store for us. And you know what they say next? As long as they're healthy. Have you ever said that? Don't raise your hand. Like, as long as they're healthy, what does that mean? And you know what? When somebody says, you hoping for that boy or girl? So then I had 2 girls. I'm getting ready to have number 3. Oh, are you hoping for that boy? Whatever God has in store for us. They'd say, as long as they're healthy. And I'd say, even if they're not, whatever God has in store for us is my child. And think about what that does. It stops people in their tracks. I'm not attacking them. But then people start to realize the absurdity of what they're saying. And you may say it's just words, but words compound over time. They become the roots of what we think and feel and act upon. It becomes cultural. It becomes epidemic that we sit here and we use terrible phrases as Catholics, as Christians, about babies in the womb. Oh, you lost a baby? Oh, at least it was early on. At least it was only 10 weeks. You've heard people say this, by the way. People say it about their own kid. At least it was in the first 20 weeks. Oh, you lost your baby? At least you got to meet your baby before your baby passed. Like, what is this part where we diminish the child, the human soul that we've lost? And while we can celebrate, hopefully, this triumphant entrance into heaven, the loss is real, and it's happening to people all the time, and then we downplay it with this at least. At least it was early. And now for everybody in here, I'm going to challenge you with another thought about this. Do you realize how many people around you, how many women around you have miscarriages and are afraid to tell anybody? They come back to work hours later, the next day, they call in sick for one day when they've lost a child, because as institutions, as companies, and even as the Catholic Church, we've done a pretty poor job of being intentional and proactive in creating policies and cultural norms that allow these women to go through a real grieving process. You already used your PTO when you had a miscarriage back in January, so you don't get any time off if you have another one in September. That's the most un-Catholic thing I can think of. And I'm going to throw this in everybody's face for a second. There is a terrible company that has an app for hooking up called Bumble. Okay? I bet this app has led to more abortions than probably any other app, okay? If you go read their corporate policies, of course they pay for out-of-state abortions and all the stuff that I'm against. They also require 2 weeks off minimum if you've had a miscarriage. So the jerk tech firm that's leading to more abortions is whipping all of the Catholic institutions on how we talk about, how we approach, and how intentional we are around things like miscarriage. And I hope this is somehow planting a seed in some of you, because a lot of you have a place where you can go and impact this. You're on nonprofit boards. You're working in parishes and dioceses. You know you can impact this change. But you have to believe it's the men that are going to change this. I promise you it's the men that are going to change this. And so I'm asking you to own the way we talk about these little bambinos when they're inside of the mother's womb. So now let's talk about burdens for a second. Anybody got one of these? A burden that got to go mow the lawn this weekend, but you're stuck at the men's conference, so good luck. You know, we have to pay the bills. We have to mow the lawn. I have little kids. I have to get up in the middle of the night with whichever one is going to freak out when I get home tonight. We have to be there with aging relatives. We have to visit somebody who has dementia and hardly ever recognizes us. And then we have to go to work the next day. We have to do all this stuff. It is such a burden, and we make it worse because we tell everybody that we have to do it. And if we just switch this and tell people I get to, right? You actually don't have to do any of these things. I don't have to go home tonight. You don't have to sit with anybody. You could just not show up to work on Monday. Any one of these things you want to talk about is not a burden, it's a blessing. And in that blessing, you are being formed, you're evangelizing, you're co-creating, you are entering into life with people. But when we talk about things as burdens, they become burdens. But as Catholic men, you are already a leader. People want to know what it is that you're into. You went to a Catholic men's summit? That's weird. But I'm curious. I want to know why you're doing it. I want to know what's in your heart. Change the way you talk about your burdens and turn them into blessings. I love this quote from JP2. He says, "It is always the human person who is the purpose of work." Think about if you changed the way you thought about work and thought about coworkers and thought about people in your nonprofits. It is always the human person. Work was made for man, not man for work. Outputs are just outputs. It's excellence in our inputs and in our conversations and relationships that matter. That's why I always say, thank God it's Monday. I want you to tell somebody on Monday, thank God it's Monday, and just feel how that lift that comes off of you. I write a weekly letter on LinkedIn and also in my newsletter called Thank God It's Monday, and I'll walk down the street and a complete stranger will say it to me. Thank God it's Monday. And you know what? It feels good to hear it because thank God it's Saturday, thank God it's Tuesday. Thank God it's raining, thank God it's sunny. Align yourself with God's will. All right, let's talk about fear. Fear is such a funny thing because fear is this place where you never fear the mild case of something. You never fear something that's just a little bit bad. All of our fears are based in worst case scenarios. Fear of public speaking, fear of the car accident, fear of your finances, fear of your marriage, fear of the health of a child, you name it, fear of the medical condition you're going through right now. We always go to worst case scenario. And truth is, it does happen sometimes, but worst case scenario is not the norm. It's the exception. But we're playing into that, and that's kind of paralyzing us. And I have really bad news for you. As a human being, most of you are never going to overcome fear. It's like not going away. So if it's not going away, what's going to be our relationship with fear? Well, the truth is, if we start to dig in, it's not the thing that we're afraid of. We're afraid we can't handle it. We're afraid we can't handle the illness or the bankruptcy, or that we can't handle getting scolded at work or stumbling on stage or whatever the next thing may be. And humans are pretty resilient. You can actually handle anything. You can just go through the practical steps of bankruptcy, or you can go through the practical steps of grieving and loss. But for us, in our faith and in our prayer life, we can handle anything. We can lose a leg. We can lose our legacy. We can lose our loved ones or our own life and know that there's something bigger at play here in God's will. So I don't think that fear is going away, but I think you can live beyond it. I think you can work through it. I think you can harness it, and you can feel the fear and persevere. And now I want to tell you about a fear that happened for me. In 2019, we were expecting baby number 4. Boy or a girl, whatever God will give me. As long as they're healthy, even if they're not. C-section after 9 full months of gestation. Out comes a baby boy. His name is Ambrose Charles Schiefelbein. I get to make the announcement we have a boy. My wife is overjoyed. And then she never gets to meet him. When they pulled him over to start cleaning him, I could tell something was off. They pretty quickly told me that he was not expanding his lungs, but that this happens. And so they started a series of breathing apparatuses before taking him down the hallway to go to the NICU. As I'm walking down that hallway, I start crying because all I want is my wife, who just spent 9 months with this beautiful boy, to get to have that skin-to-skin, face-to-face moment, and it's not happening. In my heart, I'm thinking this must be, a few hours, and then we'll all be reunited. So I call my mother-in-law to go recover with my wife, and I stay with baby Ambrose. Well, it gets worse. They put medicine in his lungs, nothing's working. They do the ventilator, and it's not working. So then they sedate my son, they paralyze him, they put him on dopamine and fentanyl, and they put him on a machine called an oscillator that does not breathe in and out. It shoves air straight in. Then after they do this, they tell me this machine is the last resort. There's nothing they can do after this. And while I'm there over the next couple hours, they turn it up higher and higher and higher to the point where they tell me that it's already begun. They tore the ends of his lungs open without getting them to expand, and that's why there's a tube sticking out of Ambrose's side in this picture. My wife still hasn't spent any time with Ambrose at this point, and so I am in the hardest day of my life. I am crying and praying, and I am just trying to understand what's happening. I don't even make the announcement that I had a child born. So at midnight, I go see my wife, and my mom is sitting at Ambrose's side. But the door opens pretty swiftly. The NICU doctor comes in. He says, get a wheelchair. It's time to say goodbye to your son. And I get a wheelchair. And in the hardest walk of my life, I am praying, thy will be done out loud. Jesus Christ, thy will be done, thy will be done. My wife and I are in utter sadness. I know I'm going to baptize him when I walk in, and we're going to hold him for the last minutes of his life. And when we walk in that room, the doctors clear out, and they're around us everywhere. And then one says, don't pick him up. His numbers are not crashing like they just were. Just touch this little part of his arm. And so that lasted for 2 hours. I didn't baptize him. I called a priest in the middle of the night, and I said, get up here. At 9 a.m, Father Martin Castaneda showed up, and we had a beautiful baptism with just the 4 of us. Baby Ambrose had 3 drops of water on his head. At noon that day, I asked the world to pray for him by announcing that I had a son born, but that I needed people of faith to pray for him. The very next x-ray, his lungs opened, and the doctor started bawling. The doctor said, medicine has nothing to do with this. I stayed up all night praying for your kid. I can't promise you anything, but I can tell you that right now is the first good news I can give you. When he was 8 days old, my wife and I got to hold baby Ambrose completely out of sedation for the first time. He came home and met all of his siblings on day 16, and when I was changing him a week later, I kissed that wound on his side, and that's when I realized that I was crying and kissing that wound, and he had both hands pierced, both feet pierced, and his right side was pierced. I can't comprehend God's love for us, but I had a glimpse of it in that moment. Ambrose went on to be a regular boy. Here he is last January holding his new baby brother Eustace when he was 4 and Eustace was not even 4 weeks. Very happy little kid. We moved that week too. I'm an idiot. I moved my entire family when I had baby number 7 born that week. Who does this? Well, the golf clubs came out, all this stuff was out, and Ambrose accidentally backswung and he hit this little boy in the back of the head. This is Benny, his 3-year-old brother. Okay, so Benny gets hit so hard. I have 7 children. They get hit in the head every day. He gets hit in the head so hard, I looked at my wife and I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to the ER with him. This is ridiculous. I'll be back in a few hours. You can even see by the smirk on my face that I go to the ER a lot. Well, I was blown away when they did a CT scan and then said, we got to do an MRI. Something's going on. The concussion was real and it was fine. That's not what they were worried about. They found a tumor on his left temporal lobe. A tumor that was only found because Ambrose hit him so hard with that golf club. They said it was growing rapidly and needed to be removed immediately. My son went in and had brain surgery the next morning. Remember when I told you that we were walking down the hall saying, thy will be done for Ambrose? As they took our sedated son down the hall to do brain surgery, it was just me and my wife in the basement of this hospital, and I looked at her and I said, how are you doing? She said, you know what? I love God's will. I love that God chose us to be Benny's parents. I love that God chose Benny to have this condition because God's going to do something with this, and I love his will, even when it hurts, even when I'm sad. After it was all done, they said, in 2 weeks, we're probably going to call you and tell you it's benign. We'll be good to go. It'll be a crazy story, but that's not how the story ends. They said, we've never seen anything like this at 2 weeks. At 4 weeks, they finished up, and at 5 weeks, they gave us the results of a genetic mapping that identified that our son had a case 1 of 1 of a very rare, extremely rare, and very aggressive form of brain cancer, that he was going to need radiation and chemo. And then they did a spinal tap right after that, and they found cancer cells floating all over his spinal fluid and his brain. You know, Father Bill Casey's here. We had one of his fellow priests, Father Ken Geraci, come and do a healing prayer over our son. And the next time they did a spinal tap, they couldn't find any cancer cells floating around in his spinal fluid. So they called off the chemo and told us we could live at our house still. But they went ahead and put the PICC line in my son and started 33 days of proton radiation. Benny would every morning go off and get sedated and get radiation on his brain and then wake up every day and we would go on with life. We had a newborn infant at home, 5 other kids. I have a brand new job and we're going through this. And every day we white-knuckled our way through it and I cried myself to sleep. But every day my wife and I praised God publicly, privately, together and over this beautiful little boy. I'm happy to tell you that after he got sedated 40 times as a 3-year-old last year, he's now gone an entire year where they say that my son has brain cancer, but he has no evidence of disease, and his next scans will be the first week of December. And so we get to continue celebrating as a family and enjoying the fact that I woke up today, that I have today, right now, to love and care for other people, starting with my love of Christ, my love of Amanda, and the love of my kids. I do want you to see in this picture, Ambrose is on the far left, Benedict is on the far right. We keep them away from each other because of that golf club. But you know, I had an incredible conversation with my new friend Casimir this morning. My brother, thank you. And we shared these stories that men are supposed to share. Stories of pain, stories of people trying to convince us to have abortions, or our kids being in car wrecks, or the near death or the actual death experiences of kids and grandkids and spouses. We're supposed to have hard conversations because we're not promised the easy life. We weren't made for the comforts of this world. We're made for greatness, and greatness happens when we become men in our faith, not just passive observers, not the 15-year-old that someday is going to be the usher. And it's not too late for any one of us. You can get involved right now in your faith. You can be a man who is leading others, who's encountering others, who's dialoguing with people out of a place of love and being Christ for them in this world. When I wrap up here, I want to give you this all-forward memento of things that I want you to do in my final minute here. One is to pray for, but also with your family. I want you to, as awkward as it feels, you may not be charismatic, you may not have the right words, God just wants to hear you, and your family wants to be blessed and prayed over. Pray with and for your family. Number 2, turn all your burdens into blessings. There is no burden. It's God's will. Benny's brain cancer is not a burden. Number 3, feel the fear and persevere. The fear is not going away, so stop waiting for it. The fear isn't going away, so stop acting like there's a plateau that you're going to get to. Just live in it and persevere. Do it anyways. Be involved in a life that's going to be full of pain, but it's also going to be full of the joys, like the joy of seeing this many men together on a Saturday in Allentown. Sabbath like you mean it. Make Sunday the Sabbath. Make it where it becomes traditions and connections in times of great love and rest. And love God's will. Find a way to love God's will. When I finally got to this place of loving God's will, it makes every part of my life make sense. It's this freedom in Christ that is fundamentally different. I'm literally in the middle right now of closing down a business that we own, and it's very, very painful, but I'm okay because I have something greater than this construction company. We have something so powerful in our love of God's will and in putting Christ first that I have freedom in that, freedom to still be fully present to everyone in my life. And then last but not least, remember to hold your mama's hand. Always reach up for it. This is me speaking on a stage and somebody snapped a picture of me getting Mother Mary to hold my hand. And if you look closely, I'm actually stealing that handhold from the child Jesus, but that's just a detail. Hold your mama's hand while you care for those who rely on you, and then keep Christ in the center in all that you do. This is Amanda and little Benny during his treatments, spending time in adoration, making time for adoration every week so that we could continue to adore our Lord with all of the pain we were going through. Remember to keep Christ in the center and save some room for disco as you answer the call to live an undivided life. I'm about to jump out of here, but listen, this link, if you want to go to it, you can check out the Thank God It's Monday newsletter. There's my LinkedIn for following its daily posts about all of this stuff. There's an offer for some cool stuff related to the Catholic gentleman where you can check out the Beatitudes. So there's a whole bunch of cool stuff there. I'm going to be here for most of the day. I hope that this puts you in a place right now where you are now uncomfortable being comfortable, or that there's something that you feel challenged in, that you can rise to that occasion, and if you'd like to pray with me about anything that you're experiencing or where you want to go, I'd be happy to meet you in the back at any point for prayer. God bless all of you. Thank you very much.